The wind was hollow that morning, like the land itself was holding its breath. Coal, dust, McGraw stood alone on the ridge, hat low, boots anchored in the red earth, staring down at the quiet town of Redwater. A single crow circled overhead. In his right hand, a Colt .45 still smoked faintly, like it hadn't decided whether the killing was over. Somewhere below, a church bell tolled once. Then silence. They say revenge rides slow in the west. That morning, it arrived right on time. But to understand how the blood reached Redwater's dusty streets, you've gotta rewind. Back to the spring of 1874. Before the betrayals. Before the gunfire. When Dust McGraw still believed in loyalty. Redwater wasn't much then, just a handful of buildings clinging to the frontier like stubborn weeds. A saloon, a jail, a church, and a trading post. That's where Dust rode in after 3 years drifting cattle trails. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for a place to disappear. Inside the Iron Spur saloon, smoke hung thick as fog. Piano keys stumbled through a tune. And behind the bar stood Elias Finch, a man Dust once called brother. They'd ridden together in the war. Shared trenches, firelight, and whiskey. Elias was the kind of man who could charm the devil into buying him a drink. Dust was quiet, deliberate, the kind who saw everything and spoke little. Dust McGraw, Elias said with that lopsided grin, I thought the wind finally buried you. Not yet, Dust replied. But it's been tryin'. They shook hands like brothers reunited. But behind Elias's easy grin, there was something in his eyes. A flicker. Like a man rehearsing a lie. The weeks that followed were good, too good. Dust found work riding guard for Elias's new venture, moving gold shipments from the Redwater mines to the railhead. Dangerous work. Rich work. Elias talked big about settling down, building something that'd outlast the both of them. We're gonna own this town, he said one night, whiskey burning low. Not like bandits. Like kings. Dust just stared into his glass. He'd never trusted gold. It made honest men clever and clever men dead. But he trusted Elias. That was his mistake. In late summer, a rumor crept through Redwater like a rattler through tall grass. A gang was planning to hit the next gold run. Elias called a meeting in the saloon. 5 men, including Dust. The plan was simple, ride at dawn, guard the wagons, bring the gold home. But something in Elias's voice that night was off. Too smooth. Too rehearsed. Dust watched his old friend closely as he laid out the route. His gut tightened. But he said nothing. The next morning, as they rode out with the wagons, a strange quiet settled on the trail. No birds. Men screamed. Horses reared. Dust dove for cover. Bullets tore through the wagons. But something was wrong. The shooters weren't aiming for the gold, they were aiming for the guards. Dust returned fire, dropping 2 men in the rocks. But as smoke cleared, he saw something that froze him cold, Elias, standing on the ridge, next to the bandits, holding a rifle, and not pointing it at them. Their eyes met. Dust's heart didn't break. It hardened. Elias tipped his hat, and disappeared with the gang, the gold wagons, and Dust's last piece of faith. They found Dust half dead 2 days later, bleeding out near the creek. The sheriff figured he'd been ambushed. Dust didn't correct him. He just healed in silence, the betrayal festering like a wound that wouldn't close. Elias Finch became a ghost. Word spread that he vanished south, joined up with mercenaries, maybe even crossed into Mexico. Some said he died. Dust knew better. He spent the next 3 years tracking whispers. Following dead men's last words. A saloon drunk in Yuma claimed Elias was seen riding with black hats near the border. A dying bandit in Tucson muttered about the man who sold the king's gold. Dust never rushed. Revenge wasn't a sprint. It was a patient rider in a cold saddle. By the winter of 1877, Redwater had changed. The gold was gone. The town had shriveled into suspicion and dust. But one cold night, a stranger rode in, clean boots, expensive coat, hat pulled low. Dust watched from the shadows as the man tied his horse outside the saloon. He moved like someone who'd stopped looking over his shoulder. That was his mistake. The stranger walked inside. Laughter followed. Whiskey poured. Dust waited. Listened. Then he heard it. That voice. A little older, a little thicker, but unmistakable. Elias Finch had come home. Dust didn't draw then. He watched for hours. Elias laughed with men he didn't care about. He flashed gold he'd stolen. And he told stories like legends that weren't his to tell. Dust waited until the saloon went quiet, until only Elias and the barkeep remained. Then he stepped through the doors. The piano was silent. The lanterns burned low. Elias turned, and the grin faltered. "Well," Elias said slowly. "Look what the desert dragged in." 3 years, Dust said. His voice was low, steady. 3 years of graves between us. Elias reached for his gun, too slow. Dust's revolver was already leveled. But Dust didn't fire. "Not yet. You could have been a king," Elias said. "But you were always just a shadow behind my light." Dust's eyes narrowed. "You stole gold. You stole trust. And you left men to die in that canyon." Elias. Dawn came slow over Redwater. Elias Finch was buried on the hill without ceremony. The town barely noticed. But Dust stood there, hat in hand, staring at the grave of a man who once called him brother. The wind whispered through the sagebrush. In that silence, Dust realized something: revenge doesn't fill the hole betrayal leaves. It just stops the bleeding. He holstered his gun, turned toward the endless plains, and rode away. No songs. No glory. Just another legend swallowed by the West. They say if you stand on Redwater Ridge at dawn, you can still hear the single gunshot that ended it all. And if you listen close enough, you'll hear the wind carry a name through the canyons. Dust, McGraw. The man who rode slow, but never forgot.